This just takes you through a sketch note that was created using the Higher Design and Manufacture textbook. We mostly relate aesthetics to our visual senses, how a product might look, but sound, smell, taste and touch are just as important. For a designer, it's all about thinking about how are you making your product more attractive, how are you making safer, and how are you making it easier to use. So these link really well with other design factors such as psychology and performance. Another thing to remember is that your aesthetics is what sets you apart from the other products. So what makes yours look different on the shelf, and for that, thinking about your target market is key. Getting the right market research to tell you what the right aesthetic is for your group is really important. Now, next of all, we've got some key aesthetic vocabulary that you should be trying to get into a really good habit of using. I've written these out in funny ways that help me to understand what each of these words might mean, with the intention that I'll keep going back and adding to these notes as my understanding of each of them improves. But really what we want to be doing with the key aesthetic vocabulary is trying to use them both in our design folio but in our answers to questions as well, just to really show our understanding. So knowing all this key vocabulary is one thing, but being able to apply that to a question is a different thing and really does need some practice. This question is a really old one from old product design for us to have a go at, and I'm going to try using my sketch note to help me with that. So you'll remember that we said the key things that a designer is looking for is your product being attractive, safer and easier to use. So in my answer, I want to try and link those three things with the aesthetic vocabulary that I've mentioned. So this question asked me to describe 4 aspects of aesthetics that have influenced the design of the remote control. So I'm going to pick out 4 of my aesthetic terms, my aesthetic vocabulary to start me off. So the first thing that I want to mention is that when I look at this, I can see a line of symmetry running down the centre of the remote control in terms of how the buttons are spaced out. Maybe not so much the actual shape of the remote, but I can see it in the way the buttons are spaced out. And this looks attractive. Especially when there's so many buttons, that looks attractive to me. It doesn't look cluttered, it looks organised. So I'm going to include that as my answer. The next part I'm going to mention is the form. And by this, what I mean is the little indents in the middle. Remember, when we talk about form, we talk about the 3D shape. So those little indents make it look like it's going to fit in my hand better and is therefore going to get it easier to use. So my first point was about it being attractive, and my next one is about how the aesthetics are making this easier for me to use. The next point I want to make is about the shape, and I'm going to go with the shape of the buttons this time, because there's different buttons on there with different functions, and the shape seems to help imply what each of the buttons might do. So for example, pointing ones are in a kind of arrow shape, and volume up is above the volume down, that type of thing. So I'm going to mention that for my next point. So I've mentioned symmetry, form and shape, and I realise I've been a bit silly because I've missed out texture there. I've done it in the wrong order, but that doesn't matter. I'm just going to slot that in now at the bottom. And the thing I want to mention about texture is that the buttons have a kind of rubber-like texture to them, and some of the buttons have like a little ridge on them, or they rise a little bit, so I can feel the difference, because when you're using a remote control, you're not looking at the remote control, you're looking at the screen, you're looking somewhere else. So again, it's back to that ease of use. I can do it without looking at it. The aesthetics are helping to make this product easier to use. So now I've got to the end of my answer, I want to do that good habit of just checking that I've covered everything I want to cover. So I want to make sure I've got aesthetic aspects that link to the product parts. And I'm just going to use a coloured pencil just now. This is me self-checking that I've hit everything I want to hit. So I'm going to underline my aesthetic elements in red, and I'm going to do my product parts in blue, so that I know I'm getting into good habits just now, that I'm being clear. So as a wee reminder, this question was worth 4 marks. So I want to try and make sure I've said 4 things. So there we go, there's all my highlighted parts for my aesthetics. I've got my buttons here. When I come to form, I realise I've not actually mentioned the product here, which is quite important to be, in case I was just talking about a part of it. So I'm just going to put a wee star in and just add that in, no problem. I'm glad that I went back to check that. And then I'm going to go in. I continue to talk about the buttons, but because I'm talking about a different aesthetic aspect, that's absolutely fine. So I hope that was helpful then. A quick reviso of the aesthetics as a design factor, and just a little reminder of how you can then use your sketch note to help practice answering exam style questions.